So if you were to rent something today, it would be 4 months free on a 12-month lease.
Wow, that's about the steepest concession I've ever heard of in my life.
Yes, that's today.
Most states still have a housing shortage. Statewide, Arizona's active housing inventory for sale is 24% above pre-pandemic levels. That's what realtor.com tells us. And that's chiefly due to a lot of building. A lot of building usually does not bode well for price growth or rent growth. So tell us about rent direction and occupancy in the single family space in the Phoenix metro.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think there's a bunch of things happening in the Arizona market. First of all, one is we've had a lot of people move here, right? In the last 4, 5, 6 years,
Yeah.
pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, all of that. We are a pretty small state. You got Phoenix, you got Tucson, you got Flagstaff, and then a bunch of other small cities that kind of surround some of those. But it's not like a Texas or a Washington or a lot of these California, like a lot of states that have a lot of cities to draw from. If people move to Phoenix, that's pretty much where they start a lot of times, not every time, but and so it's really interesting when we have net in migration into Arizona, it really moves the needle for most of these cities is kind of the point. Like, and so, we're always going to be affordable. We're always going to have great weather. It's safe. We got pretty normal politics, I should say, as compared to some of the others. And so we really do have a growing population. And so what happened? We had a nice run on the real estate as you do. We had a nice run on the apartments. We had a nice run on the single family. That tapered off when the interest rates went up, essentially, right? And then we actually built too much. We built too many apartments. We built too many houses. And when interest rates went up, people kind of pulled back. And so that's what you're seeing now. So right now, it's a great time to be a home buyer. It's a great time to be a renter in most of those cities in Arizona specifically. And why would that be? It's because they have a lot of choices. So on the single family side, the listings have gone up, and therefore some of the prices have, people are starting to negotiate a little bit more. Now, here's the interesting thing, Keith. If you measure it on last year or the year before, it has huge numbers, like you just quoted, 24%.
Yeah.
24%. But really, what's happening is things are on the market like 40 days, you know what I mean? But from a week or two, it's doubled or tripled. As you know, that's still not a very realistic market. The market is still, in my opinion, pretty healthy. What I mean is it's not unbalanced. And before it was a seller's market. And so it's just normalizing. And normalizing to me, if you go over year, is I think MLS says 4 to 6 months of inventory, right? And so I think things are just normalizing. But if you've been through the run, this is like the end of the world, right? But it's not. It's just things are settling down. And I think it's the greatest time because there's supposed to be a little bit of friction between the seller and the buyer. I believe there should be just about right. It's never just right, as you know. It's usually pulls on harder on one side or the other. But we just went through an incredible time where the sellers pretty much got whatever they wanted, and the landlords pretty much got whatever they wanted. And so this is just pulling back. The tide's going back out. There's no cause for concern, at least in my world, at all. I think it's supposed to be this way. And gosh, look, what we really need is affordability. We need affordability. We need people to be able to buy homes. We need people to be able to rent. I'm in the landlord business, but I don't want rents to run. There needs to be a balance there, even though it's good for me if it does, but it's not good because what happens is then the government gets involved, and what they need to get involved in is adding supply.
Right.
And not capping the rents. What they need to do is just work with developers and, because we're growing here in Arizona. Right now we're seeing a pullback, but I think it's needed. There's nothing wrong with this. It weeds out a lot of, realtors that weren't doing much, that just got their license, were hanging around. Same with mortgage folks and title people and lazy contractors and all that stuff. So whenever there's a pullback, the professionals win.
Well, this is some really good perspective here. We're all victims of the recency bias. And yeah, you're talking largely about market normalization. What
Yeah.
sure wasn't normal or healthy in a lot of ways was back in 2021 when you might have had 50 offers for one available property and people had to bid 50K over the asking price and they might have waived their inspection, which is typically not a good idea. But when we talk about rents in the direction of rents, especially there in the Phoenix metro with single family homes, which I know your wife, Danielle, is pretty intimately involved with, typically this new supply increases competition. It increases the competition for landlords competing for more of those tenants, which is something that typically is not good for rents. Have we seen declining rents in the local market there in Phoenix?
Of course, yeah, yeah, and I'll tell you, there's a bunch of factors. So there's always cross currents. People want one answer, but there's not, right? Like, so let's just pick on a whole bunch of things that went wrong. At the tail end of all of this, it was Airbnb. Like Phoenix and Scottsdale are a huge Airbnb market. Like
I've
people
rented
come,
Airbnbs there, sure.
it's incredible, right? And so what happened was a lot of people said, "Oh, I can buy this house, throw some furniture in it." And I can get 10, 15, 20 grand a month in rent out of these things. And they were, right. And then what happened was there just was too many. So it became oversaturated. So you're definitely seeing those back on the market. And so an interesting fact, Keith, all you got to do is look at the pictures. And if you see bunk beds, it used to be an Airbnb. Like, you know what I mean? So that was the one. But two, let's don't forget, I think this run that we just had put a lot of people into the rental market for the first time on the single family side too. So we never really had this many landlords on the single family side as well. And so there was all these mistakes that people made, and they bought incorrectly. They had CapEx work. They bought with floating rate debt. And when rates went up, they weren't cash flowing. They didn't know how to manage them. So there's all this stuff that was kind of going on behind the scenes. On the apartment side of the equation, which is where I hang out mostly, I watch all this. And because my Class A buildings are competing for single family, right? Now, single family typically wins because it has a yard, has a garage, but nonetheless, I got to pay attention to it. And so it's been interesting to watch. And I think that at one point you could not find a home in the Scottsdale area under 500 grand, period, like nothing. And now, of course, those are starting to come down a little bit more, and there's some softness in the rent. So the renters have more choices. Now, why is that? There's a couple reasons. If you're a renter and you're looking for a place, I'm sure you're considering a house, but not everybody wants a house, especially if you're single, or maybe it's just you and somebody else, and maybe you don't have a pet. There's a lot of reasons why people just don't want to have a home. And so you've got condos and you've got apartments and you've got homes, and then you have school districts. So people definitely want to be in certain school districts based on their children. So you have all these cross currents going on where people want to be. And so what does all that mean? What that means is there are certain markets from a rental standpoint that are doing extremely well still, both on apartments, on condos, and houses. And then there are other markets that absolutely are not. Just depends on the concentration of all those things and all those factors that are going on. The one thing that's actually disrupting a market more than anything is apartments and condos. Primarily what's going on in Phoenix is there's a lot of new construction, and not just Phoenix, this is Tucson, Greater Phoenix. There's a lot of new construction that was started when rates were low. They were started in 21, 22, right. And because I'm a builder, it could be a year to 18 months when we're opening a project. From the time we put the shovel in the dirt, we're not even open for a good 18 months. So there's a lag period, and those started opening in 23, 24, and certainly 25. And these big projects, 200-300 unit projects, which I have several going right now, they're 1 to 2 year lease ups. You could be looking at a 2 or 3 year lag on some of the housing that's being provided. So that's all here now. That has been good for renters. That there's a couple horror stories going on, and I'll just explain. So downtown Phoenix, there was a whole bunch of apartment projects and condo projects that were built. trying to attract people to live in downtown Phoenix. Well, there's challenges for downtown Phoenix too, and we won't have to get into that. But I don't particularly think that there was ever the real demand for the amount of housing. So what you've done is people build a lot of housing in concentrated areas around the stadium in West Phoenix, near the Cardinal Stadium, downtown Phoenix, right in the heart of the business district. So if you were to rent something today, it would be 4 months free on a 12-month lease.
Wow, that's about the steepest concession I've ever heard of in my life.
Yes, that's today. So all you got to do is Google it and you'll see. And the only reason that happened, Keith, is because there was too many units delivered at a short period of time, and the demand wasn't there.
Gosh.
Now, go 10 miles up to Tempe, go to Chandler, go to Scottsdale, no concessions, right? So again, when you look at a market, you're going to see that typically a lot of these concentrate in certain areas. And so there's a lot of areas in Phoenix where the consumer or the renter has an upper hand, a lot. And so they're driving their choices based on their monthly rent. And so all of that plays into this thing. But there's areas that are rock solid. And, that would be Scottsdale, Tempe, Chandler, Gilbert, and there's areas that are overbuilt. That would be the west side, downtown Phoenix, the south side. There's areas there's pockets that are in disruption. So you can kind of pick your poison, right? Like if you're a landlord, there are areas that you want to buy in, areas that you don't want to buy in. And as a renter, you have the same kind of choices. So when you blend it all together, you guys get the national news, but really it's pretty pocketed, just like it can be in any market.
Sure. Well, you bring up so many good points there. Some of these markets that have done more building than usual are in this situation where there is landlord competition for tenants. Now, nationally, we're still underbuilt. So it's interesting to talk about one of these overbuilt conditions and that competition for tenants. Like we've been talking about, in general, a tenant prefers a single family home and its privacy for sure. They can't always afford that. But the apartment market and the single family rental market are somewhat interrelated, because if there's so much new apartment supply, it's got the appeal of being brand new. And there might even be concessions given, like you've mentioned there, Ken, and that can make it very attractive for a potentially wannabe single-family home renter to go ahead and rent an apartment instead. So this glut of new apartment supply actually can affect the single-family rental market somewhat. And competition's really interesting. I mean, certainly in my real estate investment career, I've experienced that. The first time I ever experienced that was that I owned several doors, and they were about 25 years old, and they had garages, each one of them. A new apartment complex was built close to those, so brand new, and you had to drive by this new apartment complex, everything nice, shiny, new, painted, new parking lot, everything. A prospective tenant had to drive by that in order to get over to look to my units. So that softened my rent somewhat. The one thing that saved me a bit is that my rental units were in Anchorage, Alaska. I had the garages with my units. The new apartment building didn't. They only had carports. So I did have a differentiator to help soften the blow in a rental market that became more competitive. Tell us more about the competition for tenants there in Phoenix, whether that's on the single family side or the apartment side, Ken, with concessions, and does that mean that you're altering the length of leases there in the local market? Or tell us more about how you're dealing with that competition.
It's a great question. Yeah. So I would say generally a home is going to be about $1,000 more on the average. Like if you were just to put a number on it, a 3-bedroom, Rambler type home with a garage and a yard is going to be maybe $3,000. And, that apartment, the equivalent is going to be maybe $2,000. So roughly those are kind of the numbers. But what happens? So if you're going to rent a house, you're definitely going to pay more money, right? That's for sure. And of course, depending on the area, depends on the rent. Now, what's happening in a lot of these markets, like West Phoenix, for example, where you have thousands of units being added at once, and you get this 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, and the extreme, of course, being 4 months free. If you're a renter and your rent is $2,000, but you get 3 months free, let's say, or 4, you're going to take that deal, right? Because your average rent is what, $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 a month, not $2,000. And so all of a sudden, it's going to impact those single families. So what's happening right now is the apartments that got delivered in a lot of these geographic areas, these submarkets, are definitely impacting the single family rental market. Now, if you're a family and you've got kids and you got pets and you want to be in a school district, you're not even looking. You're basically just trying to find the best deal on a home. I get that. But if you have a choice, the rents are about the same, you're going to take the house.
Sure.
Period. I would, you would. So now what's happening is there's such a difference between the rental price of a home versus the rental price of a brand new apartment that people are going to gravitate to the apartments, because those landlords trying to fill those things up are scrambling and marketing to anybody and everybody and cutting whatever deals they can, because they're just trying to get out of those construction loans. So it's a weird market right now. And of course, there are areas, Keith, that this does not exist at all, right? Like you go into like Tempe and you're not going to have, because it doesn't have the available land, which is around the Arizona State, for example, the Arizona State University. You go into North Scottsdale, you're not going to find this because North Scottsdale doesn't like apartments. And, the homes are $1 million and up. So, but there are definitely pockets where this is happening. So if you're a renter and you have choices, this is a great time for you. And to be honest, it's about time, because it was a seller's market and a landlord's market for a long time. And so it's just reverting back to the mean.
You can watch this one next.